Hello there everyone and welcome to Monster Free Ultimate for Beginners. My name is David and today we're going to be covering the heavy bowgun. Since the heavy bowgun is a weapon for the gunners and the vast majority of players are blade masters, I'm going to also introduce the concepts of gunning T-Wall within this video in addition to my regular format. With that said, the heavy bowgun is known as the powerhouse of the gunner family, boasting the highest potential damage output not only within its weapon class but also in the entire game when it's used correctly. This makes it a great choice for any player who wishes to create utter chaos from a distance due to the weapon's devastating amount of firepower. As for gunning itself, the primary objectives of a gunner are the same as that of a blade master. Simply don't get hit and hit the monster until it dies. The difficulty begins when the fact that a gunner's defense value is usually half of that of a blade master, so more attention is needed in regards to evading monster attacks. This, coupled with reload times and recoil management, force the gunner to think ahead of what is actually happening, so less attention is placed on being reactive in order to avoid attacks, and more attention is based on three principles: positioning, perception, and planning, each of which work with one another to make the gunner truly become as effective as they can possibly be. Positioning reflects how well the gunner can essentially avoid attacks, but it also dictates their damage output as well as what they can potentially hit with relation to the ammo type that is currently loaded within their respective gun. Perception concerns what the gunner actually sees and takes notice of. For example, a gunner should be able to tell what their current target is doing and what they are likely to do after their current action is finished in order for them to exploit the situation. At a basic level, this covers knowing when to reload and knowing when you can actually shoot your target without fear of getting hit yourself. Finally, planning puts all of this information together to form a on-the-spot plan of action or strategy for the gunner to use going forward, which will likely change depending on the given scenario that they're currently in. Some environmental impacts that can influence this include the current zone size, whether the fight is on land or in the water, and also the current monster's pattern, size, and attack speed. Preparation could also be considered a principle as it concerns the success of the gunner before they even get started. This principle not only concerns the player's choice of bowgun in relation to their target as well as their armor skills, but it also concerns the ammo, items, or combined materials that the player brings with them on hunts. In relation to these principles, the gunner who uses a heavy bowgun has a few things to consider. It is the slowest gunning weapon in terms of sheathing as well as movement speed, so the player needs to be aware of this limitation at all times, as not doing so will likely result in a large chunk of their health suddenly disappearing, especially if the target is fairly quick on their feet. To help avoid this issue, I personally like to use Evade Extender as it makes evading attacks much easier and it is also very useful for positioning purposes. I also do not sheath or unsheath the heavy bowgun unless I know for certain that I won't be hit in the process. It should also go without saying that the player shouldn't reload or shoot if they don't have the time to evade an attack, as this can be very costly toward their own health bar. This can also be somewhat alleviated by putting a shield on your heavy bowgun, but when the player becomes more comfortable with the weapon, it will no longer be necessary. These mobility issues may make the heavy bowgun sound unappealing to many, but the weapon makes up for it in two ways. The first is that the weapon as a group generally has lower deviation and recoil than their light bowgun brothers. This makes them easier to use when it comes to actually firing your weapon. The second is that the heavy bowgun simply hits like a truck. This, coupled with the gunner's ability to seemingly hit whatever they want whenever they want to, makes the weapon a complete and utter powerhouse. Because of this damage output, a heavy bowgun user can break monsters' parts like wings, faces, whatever, very easily, as well as seemingly stunlock monsters pretty much on their own. And on top of all of this, the weapon's damage potential is increased further for the use of a power barrel attachment. In terms of positioning in relation to damage output, a gunner will generally want to be 2 to 3 rolls away from their target when using normal shells and 3 to 4 rolls away from their target when using pierce shells. This is because if you are too close or too far away, your shells won't be doing nearly as much damage as they would do in their optimal range. The last thing I need to talk about concerning the heavy bowgun is that when a gun has a rarity of 6 or higher, the player has the option to then remove the limiter. Now I'm going to run by you the basic pros and cons of doing this for your heavy bowgun, but in large your decision will come down to the individual gun itself as well as your own personal preference. Removing the limiter will increase the gun's raw damage output, which means you'll simply do more damage per bullet from your weapon. To compensate for this, the gun no longer has access to siege mode. Siege mode roots the player in place, but in return grants them the ability to essentially fire roughly 20 to 30 rounds of a given shot type without reloading. Siege mode is useful when the monster is trapped, cannot move, or when otherwise the gunner can get away with unleashing a fixed barrage of death to inflict a lot of damage over a very short period of time, But in turn, it is risky when the monster is actively running around, as the gunner will likely get hit at some point if the player doesn't stagger the monster. The decision to remove or keep the limiter boils down to a simple trade-off. If the player wants to do more damage over the course of an entire fight, then I would suggest them to remove their limiter. On the other hand, if the player wishes to effectively lock down a target or has several means of trapping or stunning a monster, then they should keep the limiter on. It's also important to consider what bullets your gun can use whilst in siege mode. If the gun can't use the shells you want to use whilst in siege mode, then I would recommend removing the limiter, but ultimately it is down to the player's own preference. In addition, the limiter can be added or removed at any time for an infinite amount of time, so you will not be locked into your own decision. So if you ever want to change, you can do so whenever you feel like it. To summarise, the heavy bowgun has a lot of advantages going for it. The first and arguably most important is that because the weapon hits like a truck, it is capable of the highest consistent damage output out of all the weapons in the entire game. Because the weapon is a ranged weapon, reach essentially becomes a non-issue for you, and because of that reach, you can hit essentially whatever you want when you want to. This also makes the weapon very versatile. Now this is in accordance to the type of gun you bring in addition to the monster you fight. For example, if the target monster is fairly big and its hitboxes are fairly close together, then you probably want to use pierced ammo. If not, then you're going to generally stick with normal ammo, either normal S2 or normal S3 depending on what you want to hit at the time. S3 for general use and S2 if you can clearly see what you want to hit and you want to do as much damage to that specific spot as possible. These small factors in versatility, ammo shot, range, and the ability to hit whatever you want to, in conjunction with the damage output, means you're going to be breaking specific parts of monsters like crazy. Because you're going to be doing so much damage to these parts, you're going to break these stagger limits like crazy. And if you combine yourself with another 3 people in a group who are also using a heavy bowgun, you're going to be doing monster quests like crazy. You'll be finishing so fast it'll be completely ridiculous. Even if the other 3 people in your group aren't using heavy bowguns, you'll be contributing significantly towards the overall kill time. I mean significantly. As I said, that damage output is nothing to snuff at. You will crush things. The weapon does, however, have some disadvantages. The most notable for me is that the weapon does have clear mobility concerns, so you need to pay attention to when you're sheathing or unsheathing, when you're rolling, and when you're otherwise moving around within the scenario you're in. So you just need to pay attention to what's going on, what the monster's doing, what are you doing, what you can get away with, and things like that. But overall, if you do that, you should be fine. In conjunction to that, as I said, you have less defense as a gunner in general, so this is also a key reason why you need to be paying so much attention to what's going on around you rather than what you're primarily doing. And above all, being a gunner in general is a massive mentality shift from being a blade master, at least in my opinion, so that may get some getting used to for some players. And finally, the weapon is very reliant on ammo, so not only are you paying or combining the materials needed to take ammo with you on the hunt to begin with, you're going to bring some extra materials with you in order to make more of that desired ammo that you're currently using. For those of you who are looking for a general comparison between the heavy bowgun and the light bowgun, the heavy bowgun offers higher attack power, bigger ammo clips. It's usually better at handling recoil. Again, the same for deviation, as the deviation is usually smaller. It also has strong non-elemental shots. By that I mean anything that doesn't have an element, from normal, pierce, pellet, crag, cluster, and so on. You're going to be doing a lot more damage with a heavy bowgun on that. However, the weapon suffers from slower reload speeds, weaker elemental shots, longer unsheath and sheath times, as well as a lack of status shots. Finally, the weapon, of course, is less mobile. As for the skills we're going to generally want to use with the heavy bowgun, this will largely depend on what you personally want in addition to what your current gun demands. For example, if the gun you want to use has high recoil, then put in recoil down. If the reload speed is a bit slow, put in reload speed. Same for deviation. If your gun veers too far to the right, left, up in the air, whatever, you're going to need steadiness so it can help shoot straight. Now, you don't actually need steadiness. In some instances, you can curveball your shot exactly where you want it to go. For the general use, you're probably going to want steadiness in there. Aside from all that, one key skill I'd throw in is evade distance. I mentioned it already. It helps evading. It also helps you just simply position yourself better, get in closer, move back when you need to. It's very useful for all of that. Evade 1 and +2 is also very nice just for general use if you're really close to the monster. Not too close, of course, but it's helpful generally. Some form of damage increasing ability is always advised when gunning, just because you can push your damage output that extra bit further, and when it's already high, when you push it a bit more, it becomes utterly ridiculous. So attack up large, critical eye +1, 2, 3, depending on what you can get. And I also put in normal / pierce up, because what this does is gives you a flat out 10% increase to that relevant shot. So if you have a gun that's designed for pierce damage, normal damage, but the depending shot increase up there, so you'll be putting out that much extra damage. As for everything else, I tend to like skills that can give you the much needed utility to prevent you from getting hit or prevent you from getting stunned. So earplugs, tremor resistance, or anything like that. I put in Rocksteady in this list because it covers the broad base of pretty much everything, so it's very good for that. And finally, if you would like to utilize a lot of siege mode, use a lot of traps in the process, I recommend Trap Master as well if you wish to do that. So with all that information said and thrown out there, this about wraps up this episode of Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate for Beginners, ladies and gents. Hopefully you got some useful information out of it. Hopefully I get some of you out there to go ahead and try the heavy bowgun. It's a lot of fun. And let me know how you're coping with that mentality shift. And if you're having any problems, throw them down in the comment section or send me a message or anything like that, and I'll hopefully get back to you on that front. So as for the video, guys, that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. As I've said, thank you for watching, and that's about it. Have a great day.